The Milwaukee Brewers pulled the trigger on a huge trade that sends Corbin Burnes to the Baltimore Orioles. And the natural follow-up question is Willy Adames next? Both players on expiring contracts. And Willy Adames just so happens to be a fit, a really good one for the Giants.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday now, back to 5 days a week starting today, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Check us out there if you have not already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you happen to be listening or watching the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And where we get started is that there was a major trade tonight with the Brewers basically deciding, like, that's how I kind of view it, like deciding, maybe they decided a long time ago, but to send away one of the best pitchers in baseball, Corbin Burnes, which is a huge blow to their 2024 team. And so naturally it begs the question, like, do other players who are in a similar position to Burnes, because the position that Burnes was in as it pertained to like how the Brewers are the Brewers have been competitive year after year after year. I think they missed the playoffs last year, but they've been to the playoffs a lot, even though they kind of don't spend a ton of money and all that. But I think they may be at a moment in time with guys like Burnes and Willy Adames reaching free agency at the end of the year, where if you're a team that doesn't spend a ton of money, you end up trading those guys away right before, or ideally like a couple of years before, but they didn't do it last off season. They did it this off season, but essentially, like, Burnes is a free agent after the season. And so if you're the Brewers and you're thinking, we're not going to be able to get an extension done, like we're just too far apart, and you're thinking he's probably going to end up leaving in free agency, the time is now to kind of make that move and bring in as much as you can possibly get for him. So that's kind of the logic, and that's why naturally we turn to Willy Adames next, because Willy Adames is in the exact same position where he doesn't play the same position, but he's in that same position where he's a free agent at the end of the year. So if you're going to do it with a guy like Burnes, trade him away, then it makes all the sense in the world to also follow that up and trade away a Willy Adames. And I thought, I made this point first. I mean, not first, but I made the point before Andrew Baggarly made the point, which is being that, what is his name? Ortiz. Somebody Ortiz. I'm blanking on his, Joey Ortiz, a shortstop, and DL Hall going to the Brewers in this trade. So Joey Ortiz being a shortstop, Andrew Baggarly on Twitter then wrote, one wonders whether the Brewers acquiring Ortiz will be a precursor to a Willy Adames trade. And then he gives like an emoji of a thinking person with an eyeglass. So anyway, one certainly does wonder. And to me, it makes it like I'd put the odds pretty darn high on Willy Adames being traded. And so that's where the Giants come in. Like, does he make sense for the Giants? And to me, the answer is like unequivocally yes, he does make sense for the San Francisco Giants for so many different reasons. Number one, he is a shortstop, and this is a position of need for the Giants. you don't want to block Marco Luciano, but I'm going to explain how I don't necessarily think that acquiring Adames blocks Marco Luciano. I'll get to that a little bit later. So don't worry if that's your first instinct is to be like, what about Luciano? So the defense, he plays shortstop. I think that's all I said, but he plays it exceptionally well. The last 2 years, he has combined for 26 outs above average and 17 defensive runs saved, and an ultimate zone rating of like very high, like 11. And these are all in runs above average, except outs above average is obviously in outs above average, but it comes out to 19 runs above average according to that metric. So in the 2 years combined. So we're talking about, I mean, I'm kind of like bickering with certain people on Twitter lately and kind of pointing out that a run scored is the same as a run prevented. Like, it's the same thing. If you prevent a run, it has the same effect on a score and then scoring a run. And so, I think they have a lot of ground ball pitchers, and Brandon Crawford was way past his prime. He still like flashed a good glove, but we're talking about like peak Brandon Crawford level defense potentially from Adames. He's got a monster arm. That's one of the things that really stands out about him. And there are so many other qualities to like about Willy Adames as well. And one of them is that he's not a bad hitter at all. In fact, this is a guy who hit 25 home runs in 140 games 3 years ago. He hit 31 home runs in 139 games 2 years ago, and he hit 24 home runs in 149 games last year. So a little bit of a step back last year, but the dude has legitimate power. And so he's just an above average hitter. So when you combine above average offense, he's not like crazy above average. He's not an MVP candidate per se, but he is like an all-star candidate in any given year for sure. So when you combine like above average hitting with exceptional defense, you get a really valuable player. And if you look at the projections up on Fangraphs now, they've got a lot of different projections. They've got Zips, they've got the Bat X, they've got the Bat, which is a different version, obviously, of the Bat X. They've got ATC, they've got Steamer, they've just got a lot. And basically, the range for Adames is on the low end, like 3 wins above replacement, and on the high end, upwards of 4. And so that's where he's been the last 3 years. 3.3 in 2021, 4.6 in 2022, and 3.4 in 2023. So if you get this guy, you're getting a plus, like just a plus player. And that's the thing, is if you look at the return for Burnes, it wasn't crazy. And the reason I'm always saying this, the reason is because he's only under team control for 1 year. That's why the return for Mookie Betts wasn't crazy, which makes me think, well, that maybe the Giants should have gone out there and done what they had to do. I don't think that at the time they had the players that the Dodgers had to make that trade. But regardless, the other thing Adames has working in his favor is he's only 28 years old. He turns 29 in September, and so he's young. It's not like he's in his decline phase at all, and maybe you could kind of sell him on your city and try to re-sign him, because this is the kind of guy that you could try to lock in for years and years to come. And, with the Giants and that's the thing, though. Like, we look at Luciano, so I want to get into that whole dynamic of, a 1 year situation. If you were to go and get an Adames, what would it take to get him? And would it be worth extending him, given you've got, a guy like Marco Luciano knocking on the door and making it to the major leagues in 2023? So we will get into all of that in just a minute. And before we do, today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style. And for me, it was always style for my vehicles. eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, as promised, we are going to get into a lot of different topics as they pertain to Willy Adames because, look, some of you out there might already just be like, they're not going to get this guy. And cynicism and all that, it's just not really my thing. And they very well may not get him. He's just one of numerous options for the Giants as we do get, we are in February now. Spring training is like 2 weeks away. And so, yeah, that's legit. But it's also legit to point out that there are so many players who are unsigned in free agency. There's Matt Chapman. He makes sense. There's Cody Bellinger. He could make sense. There's Blake Snell. He definitely makes sense. There's Jordan Montgomery. And then there's a big drop off after that. But there's the trade market, and this Corbin Burnes trade just really signals that the Brewers are open to trading Adames. Like, that's how I read it. And like, kind of, you almost have to at this point is kind of how I read into it. Like, don't just sit in the middle. If you're going to go one direction, go full on in that direction. Don't kind of trade away your best pitcher, but keep your best position player. Doesn't really make sense. Who's also on a contract that's going to run out after the season. By the way, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, so a lot to get to here, as I was kind of alluding to earlier. I want to get to like the Marco Luciano angle and why I think that like acquiring Adames wouldn't necessarily block Luciano. And that is because third base is also a position that's kind of open right now. And pretty much everybody who scouts Marco Luciano, all the prospect, like we went over top 100 prospect rankings just yesterday and read yet again, like we've read a zillion times, that scouts believe Luciano is not going to be able to stay at shortstop and that he's better suited for third base or like right field. And so you could, and the other thing is Adames is on a 1-year deal, and Luciano, yeah, I'm sure he would prefer to play short, but also if you just like moved him to third and still gave him opportunities, he's not going to complain, at least not publicly. He just wants an opportunity, I'm sure, more than anything. It's not a Brandon Crawford type situation where you have to be really sensitive about it, which they weren't, by the way. But with Correa. But third base currently looks like J.D. Davis, and you've also got Casey Schmitt in that mix. But I have pointed this out several times. What does first base look like? What does DH look like? And right now, as of right now, this moment, first base looks like you've got Lamont Wade there, and he is a platoon player. He does not hit left-handed pitching well. Bob Melvin is a new manager. It's not that Farhan Zaidi's up there controlling Bob Melvin like he's a puppet. Bob Melvin is just smart enough to recognize what a platoon player is, and Wade is one. Or at least, I'm never going to say like a guy can't improve or whatever, but Wade figures to be platooned. Let's just put it that way. And who's platooning with him? So when there's a lefty on the mound, who's starting at first base? And the quick answer is like Wilmer Flores. And I think that's the right answer because he has the most experience there when you're looking at another option in JD Davis. And then, so if Wilmer Flores is at first and JD Davis, let's say, is at third, who's the DH? Who's the DH? And that's where it's like they don't have an obvious answer. Like you want to say Conforto, well, he's like your starting left fielder and he's left-handed, so he's not really the guy you want in that impact offensive role against a left-handed pitcher. And so I just keep saying, like, that's why Matt Chapman would work, because even if, because it would allow JD Davis to like be more of the DH. And so I think that there's a way to make it work where you go get a Willy Adames and then suddenly third base becomes like a competition between some young guys like Luciano and Schmitt, and also JD Davis. And like suddenly there's competition, like healthy competition. And I think ultimately it'd be nice if you gave opportunities to Schmitt, who would give you, I think it's his best position defensively. So maybe he might struggle with the bat like we saw through extended stretches in 2023, but at the same time you'd be getting great defense. And so all of a sudden, like I said with Adames, Thairo Estrada also was really, really good defensively last year. So you would suddenly have just like some elite defense in your infield. But I'm kind of ignoring Luciano. But I don't know exactly how Luciano's defense even looks at shortstop, let alone like, okay, if he moved to third base, which is in theory like an easier position, but not necessarily if you haven't played there a lot. So there's a lot less range involved at third base, but they did write in the scouting report that I read yesterday that he was kind of error prone, which kind of means like, not fielding balls cleanly, which maybe is even more challenging at third sometimes because you're closer to the plate. So anyway, but I just think that there's if everyone and their sister thinks that Marco Luciano has to move off of shortstop, it wouldn't be shocking for the Giants to go acquire a shortstop and to create a competition at third. And I think if that competition mostly consists of Schmitt and Luciano, I would be okay with that. And then JD Davis could play there, if needed. But the better fit, I feel like, would be for him to be more like a permanent or like everyday type DH, obviously filling in at times at third and first as needed or whatever. But and then you could have Flores and Wade at first, and then you could have Adames everyday shortstop, Thairo everyday second base, and Bailey as your catcher, and Jung-Hoo Lee, who may be quite good defensively. Up the middle defense suddenly would be a strength, like a real strength of the Giants, and that is something they've been talking about for a couple years now. And the infield defense was okay. I think it was pretty good actually last year, but they just want to improve the defense and the athleticism, and Adames certainly does that. And so then when we get to like, okay, what would an extension? How would an extension make sense? Because, these are guys where if you were to acquire them, you could extend him now and just lock in a shortstop of the future long term. And he is young. He's only 28, so he'll enter free agency at, entering his age 29 season, and that's pretty young. And so he figures to get probably north of $100 million in the free agent market, and that's probably a worthwhile investment for the Giants. And I continue to think the Giants are not done. There's a lot of free agents left out there, and also like giving that plan that I just described, like a year, giving Luciano a season so that we can, and Schmitt another season where we can see what he can do, and then adjusting after that. Because right now, Luciano's a big unknown. And so you don't just want to like hand him the job and then if it doesn't work out, be stuck with, poor production essentially. And so the more I think about it, the more I like this plan. So it gives you a year, and you don't have to commit to Adames. You don't have to extend him now. Maybe he wants to test free agency. Maybe he doesn't like San Francisco. I have no idea. But nobody's making you extend him now. And so you could just have him for the season and evaluate Adames, evaluate Schmitt, evaluate Luciano. I think JD Davis is in the last year of his contract, and so third base becomes an open position for the Giants after the season anyway. So you're also evaluating Davis in that regard. And so there's just a lot that makes sense about it to me. And the ultimate question, JD Davis is in fact entering the last year of his last year of team control. He'll become a free agent for the first time after this upcoming season. But the big question, the elephant in the room, is what would it cost? It wouldn't cost money to acquire. That's the thing about trades, right? Is that they cost players, not money. And as a fan, I always prefer that the cost be money, but you don't get access to these guys who aren't free agents unless you pay in the form of players instead of money. You could send money, but the Brewers wouldn't do this deal for just money. They want players back. So who are the players that it would take to bring in a Willy Adames? We'll look at the Corbin Burnes trade and kind of compare values and make a determination about what's kind of a comp for that and what would it take to get Adames, and is it worth it ultimately? So all of that in just a minute. And before we get into it, today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And I think pretty much all of my listeners are happier than most about this upcoming Super Bowl with the 49ers. Yes, indeed, your San Francisco 49ers making it all the way to the big game. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. So what I love most about the Super Bowl this time around is going to be watching the game itself, and hopefully the Niners crossing the finish line and bringing home a trophy for the first time in a long time. But normally the commercials, the game, it's all just a great time. So one of the things that can add to the great time is FanDuel, and there's many ways for you to end the football season with a dub or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, by the way, the 49ers favorites at minus, I had this pulled up and now it's disappeared, minus 130 and a spread of minus 2.5. Over under set at 47.5 up on FanDuel right now. But you can bet on which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, as promised, we're going to discuss what would it take to get Willy Adames. And also I was asked, and I promised I would answer, what are some comparable players to what the Brewers gave up for Corbin Burnes, and would that deal have been worth doing? And so starting with that one, Jacob asked, on Twitter, can you break down the Burnes trade and comparable players the Giants would have had to give up, and if it would have been worth it? So I obviously didn't know all that much about Joey Ortiz. I have been in communication with the host of Locked On Orioles about Joey Ortiz this offseason, because he's brought him up with the Giants kind of seeking a shortstop. Potentially, he's brought him up as a possible fit for the Giants. Joey Ortiz, the quick prospect write-up. Joey Ortiz is a slick shortstop defender with a plus hit tool and very little pop. So there you have it. That's, Fangraphs ranks him as a 50 future value player. This was also last year's ranking. So if I were to pull up the MLB.com top 100 prospects, I know more about the other player. There's 2 players that are going in this deal. So Joey Ortiz, let's see if he's even on top one. Yeah, he's number 63. Number 63, Joey Ortiz, in terms of the MLB.com top 100 prospects list. And then DL Hall is the other player involved in this trade going to the Brewers. And for DL Hall, he's kind of like a Josh Hader possibility. Like, he's just a guy with nasty stuff. He's had trouble with injuries. He's like a starter, but he hasn't been able to stay healthy. And so he also has had command issues. And so there's like big reliever risk with DL Hall. He's at times been a top 100 prospect, at times been kind of towards the back end of it. So that's the thing. You're not talking about like the number 2 and the number 4 and the number 10 overall prospects in the game getting traded for Corbin Burnes. You would be if he had like 4 years of team control on like, cheap salaries. But when it's 1 year of team control and it's a lot of money, I'm assuming Corbin Burnes is set to make quite a bit of money this upcoming season through arbitration. 15.6 million. It's actually not bad at all for a player of his caliber. So that's even more surprising that the return was, I don't want to say as light as it was, but it wasn't huge. DL Hall and Joey Ortiz, it's just not a massive, it's not earth shattering by any means. Although DL Hall, he's got a lot of upside. He's just an arm. I don't want to say he's like Kyle Harrison because he's not, and he's already 25 years old. And I don't know. I mean, I think you're looking at a reliever, and so that kind of changes the equation. But maybe you're looking at a guy who eventually is like a Josh Hader type reliever. So, but he's not established yet. And so it's not like, okay, Camilo Doval. I think that's a little bit different. So a comp from the Giants side, I mean, like, let's see, a guy who's ranked in the middle part of the top 100. I mean, maybe like a Carson Whisenhunt as one of the players in the deal. Call him the DL Hall of the deal, even though he's quite different. They're not similar players. Whisenhunt a little more like has command, but nasty changeup. And then the other player, Joey Ortiz, I don't know exactly like who to say here. I mean, it could be depending on your evaluation. I mean, it could be Casey Schmitt. It could be Marco Luciano if you're down on Marco Luciano. It could be Bryce Eldridge or something, like one of their recent top picks, like Whisenhunt and Eldridge, if that was the return. Let's just say something like that, because both of these guys appear on the top 100 list, and DL Hall, I think he would if he was still rookie eligible, but he's not anymore. So that's the comp, and should the Giants have done that? I think this is, like I said, I always prefer that they just spend cash on a player. And so when you've got a Blake Snell out there, just go pay the money and don't give up the young talent. That's my position on this. But with Willy Adames, it's a little bit different because they were all in on Carlos Correa, right, being their long-term answer at shortstop post Crawford, but that deal fell apart, and now there is no long-term answer unless it's Luciano, but it's a big risk. And so basically, what would it cost for Willy Adames, and would it be worth it? Well, I think Burnes has / had more trade value. Corbin Burnes, I mean, he's just a frontline arm like this. Yeah, Corbin Burnes for sure. Like, Willy Adames is good, but Corbin Burnes is better. And so it would cost less. And so you're talking like, okay, maybe like, Carson Whisenhunt straight up for Willy Adames or something. Like it would hurt, but it wouldn't kill you to I don't know. I like Whisenhunt a lot, but you got to give something up to compel a team to give up a player of Adames's caliber. And I think given that the return for Burnes was relatively modest, I mean, I like these players fine. But again, we're not talking about this major return, and that the return for Adames would be less, and that the Brewers are seemingly, to me, likely now to trade Willy Adames. I think that giving up whoever it is, whether it's Whisenhunt, I really wouldn't want to give up Eldridge. Some young pitching like Tristan Beck and I don't know if like Tristan Beck and Casey Schmitt or something. Like, I don't know if that would be of interest to the Brewers, but it's hard. There's a million permutations we could come up with, but it's not going to be like Kyle Harrison and Marco Luciano and Whisenhunt and Eldridge. And it's just, that's way too much. Like Kyle Harrison, way too much. The Giants would never do that. Marco Luciano, I think, way too much. The Giants would never do that. And so it's someone kind of maybe like a top 100, mid top 100 prospect type player. And according to MLB.com, that's like a Carson Whisenhunt where he falls on the list. Although I'm a biased Giants fan, so I think that I'd have him a little higher maybe than where he is. But at the same time, you got to give up something of value in order to get something of value. So I think ultimately it would be worth it. And Adames makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons for the Giants. And so I hope that this happens. A lot of you probably think it won't, but the offseason, I want to say it's young. It's not. It's old at this point, like with spring training around the corner. But there's still a lot that's going to happen. It's just going to happen late. That's just the reality of this offseason for whatever reason. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day, everydayers. Tomorrow we are going to be back with another show as we are back to daily Monday through Friday. Let's get into some mailbag questions. It's been a long time since we've done that. And just a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like the show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot. So thank you so much to everyone who's done so already. I do read them. And thank you in advance to those who will. Unless you're going to leave a bad review, then I don't thank you. But hopefully you won't. Thank you. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Speculation, but nonetheless very interesting to me. And we will see you tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You're now Locked On Giants.